Welcome to The Mountain in Us, a podcast where the journey gets its voice. I am Taran Singh, your host. Here we greet the thrills, jolts, ascents, and descents of our uncharted adventures. Hey everybody, today my guest is Kim Larkin. She is an experiential futuristic and a creative in Taos, New Mexico. Rooted in Southwest and nurtured by creative expression, global cultures, and experience, she weaves research, strategy, and storytelling to explore humanity, interconnection, and imagination. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you today about the cosmic play of clay, collision, and colors.
Yeah, me too. Super excited to dive in, and we'll go right into the high desert. I want to first ask you, were you always enchanted by the high desert and the landscape of Taos? How did you come to spread your
Hmm. Well, I grew up in the southwest of what's known as the United States in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I lived in Arizona for almost 15 years after that. I'm newer to New Mexico. I left Phoenix in 2022 after nearly 15 years, and I followed some friends that moved to just a small rural community in northern New Mexico, and I just absolutely fell in love with the landscape. Northern New Mexico has all of these pieces of what I consider to be the best parts of the Southwest, from alpine forests and lakes to desert landscapes, gorges, red rocks. But without all the people. So it's a very beautiful, quiet part of the Southwest that I really just fell in love with. And I spent about 18 months in that area. And then I went to Uruguay and was living in Uruguay for about a year, or excuse me, about 6 months, about a year ago. And I needed a place to return to. And I knew I wanted to come to northern New Mexico, which housing is really difficult to find. But I completely lucked out and I found this beautiful round adobe house that was built in the early 80s out in a little community called El Prado, which is about 15 minutes from Taos. And it has just open landscape, it's solitude, and I wasn't sure if I was going to stay initially. I kind of landed in Taos a little bit on accident or just out of necessity. But as I got to know the area and I went more out into the landscape and there's hot springs nearby, natural hot springs on the Rio Grande. And I just connected more and more with the complex history of the area, and also something that I didn't realize when I first moved, which was the deep and long arts and culture history in the community. So as I spent more and more time, I just felt like I couldn't imagine a better place to be.
yeah, the collisions of pathway pushed to Taos? That's the essay I'm reading. uh,
Yeah.
uh, in
It's a
you
very
know,
common story in Taos.
yeah,
A lot of people talk about kind of ending up here on accident, but then feeling this pull of sort of essence that just feels really special.
yeah. I've not been to Taos, but in general, I've been to New Mexico, especially north of Santa Fe. But on surface, it looks so desolate. But as soon as you walk in further and talk to people and just understand the culture and the history that it holds, it is amazing, absolutely amazing. The name might say new in New Mexico, but everything here has such a deeper connection to the past. And now you've been, you were in Uruguay, and that's a country by the ocean, uh,
Hmm.
and now you're in desert. And did you realize that change coming in your head, or this just happened so quickly that it is still settling in your head?
Actually, that interplay was really important to me. I knew when I was leaving New Mexico, and went to Uruguay, I wanted to be near the water. I was really feeling that pull of the ocean and the currents and that type of landscape. Um, but then at heart, in the Southwest, people call it a desert rat, of someone who just loves this type of landscape, and I feel really at home in it. And there's a lot of challenges to living in the Southwest, especially as climate change increases the risk and rates of fires and things like that. And there's so many unknowns about the future. And I've just really thought, I want to be rooted in this place that I love so much. But it's also really important to me to go get that needed, almost that moisture, that different type of energy that the ocean brings at times too.
Yeah, I like the terminology, the desert rat, like that you yeah, are rats a common feature of the landscape? Like at least I live in the bay, and the salt mice is one of our most important member of the ecosystem because everything is foundationally based on salt mice, and they're one of the endangered species of the wetlands. But I didn't know much. I don't know much about the rats of the desert. We'll take that for another topic, but I want to continue and ask a little bit more about what you mentioned recently, right? Is just um, that global warming and the changes are coming. But I do believe that at least places like Tao, where the mix is, where the wisdom of the past is still enshrined in with the people, that they have a better handle of what would happen and how they and what they would play in. Do you see that? Do you see that native heritage still plays a bigger part in the vicinity and around Taos of how people think and how they embark in securing a better future for humanity?
Mhm. I think absolutely in a lot of ways. I'm very fortunate that I live in a place where I'm only about 10 minutes from Taos Pueblo, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the oldest continually inhabited community in the US. So the history there is deeper than you can find anywhere else in the whole country. And but there's also a complex interplay of the Spanish community who came during colonialism, and then layered on top of that when the US took over the territory. So you have these layered and interconnected, almost woven histories that have a lot of things that are really contrasting and butt up against each other, and then a lot that really are intermixed. And the Taos Pueblo people they speak Tiwa and are known as the Red Willow people, which Taos, the community, is actually named after the home of the Red Willow people. And is intrinsic. You see so much of that influence in everything from the landscape to the architecture. The adobe style Pueblo buildings that are you see all over the Southwest are examples of architecture that was originated from the Pueblo people. So there's so much, and in fact, the community is it's incredible to visit. You can visit and learn about the history and the people, but you can also interact. They're very graciously welcoming to invite visitors to come to dances and different events that mark the seasons and really get to experience this culture and learn about in this direct way that I think is really, really special. And in fact, after our podcast today, I'm going to be going over to the weekly farmers market, which goes all year long at the Pueblo, and get fresh produce from people who have been cultivating in that ancestral homeland for thousands of years, which that type of connection to past and present exists and is just all over northern New Mexico in really interesting ways.
Yeah, yeah, and Native people are known to be great stewards of their land. They take pride in keeping the land and also sharing the bounty of the land, right? Which is which is so unique to them, but also unique to which is essential for us as humans. That in the world of consumerism, we forget that land is part of us. We just can't keep exploiting it forever.
When you were asking the question about kind of the resilience of this community, and there is a lot of self-sufficiency in ways that I think is more common in rural areas, but you really don't find in more suburban or urban communities. Um, there are generational families who are running businesses that have often been taken over in corporate ways. You know, there might be a butcher down the street that, you know, you could take your cows to in the afternoon, or you can find someone who's selling natural plant medicine on the side of the road. So it is this deep connection to place. We're going to talk about my garden at some point, and something that was really special is when I got my starters for my garden, I purchased them at the local farmer's market from a farmer who said, "Oh, these are actually grown for your community, for El Prado, the small community of probably a few hundred people. They're propagated for this specific area's climate, the wind, the temperature, all of those things." So that connection to the earth is present in so many different ways, in really
Yeah.
cool ways that you can't necessarily find in other areas.
That's a good segue to gardening, and I know you you've got this beautiful house, a circular view of 360-degree, which is interesting, right? Most of our houses out here in West are all squares or rectangles where you have no view. It's just people, stacked upon stacked. But tell us about the garden, right? You looked at the house. What did the garden come to you, or you came to the garden? How was the journey to till the first clay?
My first experience gardening was when I was a maybe a teenager or preteen. I had this dream of having this garden space, and my mom actually helped me cultivate it. And as soon as we got it finished, I kind of lost interest. And I never really connected to it in the way that I expected. And for years of my life, especially when I was living in Phoenix, I lived in a small studio apartment that had no natural light. And so I really wasn't able to keep anything green, and I had no outdoor space. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I moved to a new space, and there was an overgrown garden and some overgrown beds. And I spent a lot of that first summer when in Phoenix there was, it was 120 degrees outside, so you couldn't really do a whole lot or go a lot of places. But I cleared out all that space and I started growing. And I realized all of those people who had told me that I had a black thumb for years and couldn't keep anything alive unless it was plastic, that I actually did have this affinity for it when I had created the time and space to really connect with the plants and the earth and what I was doing. And when I moved to Taos and to this home, the yard was completely overgrown. The yard is circular, just like the house. And there were grasses and weeds and all sorts of things growing. And I spent that first month that I was here clearing out part of the space so I could at least spend time outside. And then with my extended time here, I realized that I'd really like to activate all of that space. And so the first month I just spent weeding,
Yeah.
weeding and clearing, and in this very meticulous way that was a little obsessive, but also was very therapeutic and grounding and connecting. And I needed that sort of clearing. It sort of, in some ways, reflected the way I was trying to clear my mind. And in fact,
Yeah.
for a little while, I was having dreams about being caught in weeds.
Yeah, I hear you. Weeding is the most essential part of the gardening, but also, in my opinion, at least, the one it grounds me every time I have to do weeding on my garden. But you're also overwhelmed because you do not know where to start or would it ever end, right? And I'm glad you found it therapeutic, and I think the good thing is that once you cut a corner and say, once you understand how the relationship of the soil and the weed and how to detangle them so that, if it's once you loosen the soil, less weeds occupy that same soil, which is interesting. And I've learned it now that you work the soil and then it's easy to work on the weed then.
Mm. Yeah, I felt like I learned a lot about the soil here. I've house is at an elevation of 7,000 feet, so it's very high desert, and the growing season's quite short. And I didn't know anything about what the soil is like here. So going through that weeding process, it was like I got to know some of the plants more, what grows, the different strategies that the roots have as they grow in the soil, and clearing that out. Um, excuse me, getting from that top kind of sandy soil down into the natural clay that exists a couple of feet below, it was like uncovering these different layers of history and these elements that are essential to the components of this space. Excuse me.
Yeah. And especially when you're at 7,000 feet and the growing season is small, right? Every square inch of sun and water matter. So did you have a strategy in mind when you put in your garden, like was or the garden angels were helping you? You talked about you got your cedar start pack and whatnot. So give us how the first roots of your creation got into the garden.
I really wanted to grow something, and that growing keeps me feeling really connected. I talk to my plants a lot. I have a relationship with all of them. Like it's really fulfilling to me. But I didn't know where to start. When I was in Phoenix, I had lots of help from friends with experience who even came over and gifted me my first gardening tools, my hand tools, which I'm still using. But I had conversations, especially with the growers. I talked to people at the farmers market who I got my plants from a local nursery, about what grows well. I said, I'm a novice gardener, so start me off with the easy things because this is my first garden up here. And how do I plant them, knowing that my home is south facing? What likes the sun? So I asked a lot of questions about what would be make the most successful garden for this first year of trying. So I ended up with things like peppers and tomatoes and zucchini and cucumber and lots of different types of greens. And it's just a garden for myself. I'm just a household of one. And so it's very small, but it's going to be, as I start to be able to harvest, it's incredible to be able to have all of my greens for the week, go and pick them in the morning, or I've been going and picking cilantro to put on my food. And it just feels really incredible and connective. And
Yeah.
I'll
Oh,
keep learning
that's a
from the people who know.
yeah. And that's the beauty of cultivation and nurturing, that this knowledge is passed by the earth to us in many ways, and we're just a carrier of that knowledge. And I like how you said, you even though you are saying it's a garden for one, once you have bounty, you will be sharing in a way that you will be surprised. Like I grow a lot of my stuff, but also first uh, first things that come out, I usually like to share. My belief is that just like the native, share the first bounty with neighbors or whoever it is, right? Even like UPS folks that drop into my house, they know that if there's zucchini growing, or like I had so much garlic that I gave it to everybody that I could find on the street. Hey, buddy, if you don't use garlic, you better start using it now.
I love it. I do. I think that that idea of growing as a community act is such a beautiful and important thing. I'm so excited for my first bumper crop of chard. I ended up with almost over a dozen chard plants on accident.
Yeah.
Which I love chard, but I'll know I'll have extra, and I can't wait to go and offer some to my neighbors or be
Yeah.
able, taking my very first peppers, I should be able to harvest in a couple of days. And I'm going up to Colorado to celebrate some birthdays with friends. So I want to take those up. So that, yeah, I don't think about that so much, but it is such an important aspect, like the community aspect of growing.
Yeah.
It's
And
made
everything you grow also tastes differently. And even if it tastes differently, even if you have plucked it with your hands, suddenly you can feel your own self in the produce that you, right? You can see your labor of love, but also the labor of your conversation. And that's where I want to go next, is to talk about, you know, at least for me, I use not garden is most also not quote unquote my therapist, but quote unquote still my therapist, right? I spend a lot of my, especially when I'm going through upheaval, I spend a lot more time in the garden, and I have a native plus edible garden, so I can see plant, butterflies, hummingbirds, spiders, whatnot, right? So, and I've realized, at least over the periods, that the more I converse with them, the better the more truthful I am to my own self, right? And I wanted to hear from you what conversations you have on your bright days and on your dark days, and how has that relationship changed Kim when she looks at the world now?
Mm. Yeah, the
I know
garden.
it's a packed question, so take your time.
Oh no, it's a great, great question. I think that it really is connecting and grounding in a way that um, I don't get from other experiences. I, a lot of my happiest moments are out in nature, and but there's something different than going hiking or kayaking or camping even and getting your hands into the soil. And that kind of grounding, for me, it quiets my mind in a way that I'm really not able to get from a lot of things. And I enjoy meditation, but something that's an additional benefit from gardening is this sense of satisfaction. And it's almost this mutual growth. So, in a time when I've been experiencing a lot of personal challenges, it helps me feel like I think reconnect to a more natural version of time and a more the cycles of time and give myself more permission to let go of this false kind of human time of there's urgency, we're supposed to be busy, there's all these things. And both being here and working in my garden reminds me that time doesn't belong to us. We just exist within it. And time is it's a construct in a way that we don't fully understand and we participate in based on our version of reality. And working in the garden reminds me that, yeah, that we exist in this greater cycle, that there's the seasons, there's the moon cycles, there's even the morning and the evening. And I've started to find myself just organically resetting myself to those times and connecting with more of looking at when the plants in the morning are waiting for the sunlight in order to spread their leaves and how they protect themselves in the wind. And I think taking a lot of lessons from that by just noticing, even how the weeds have their own strategies. So some of them go really deep and some of them create hundreds of thousands of miles of
Yeah,
tiny, tiny little roots that are all in this space that we can't even imagine how much
that's
there actually is in terms of connection with the soil and earth. So there's so many lessons to be learned.
no, that's, I mean, what you said is, the intuitiveness and the observation that you gain by just uh, observing things as the time is going to keep continuing. And I also believe that time is, our relationship to time is so sacred, but also so meaningless, and so
Mm,
meaningful at the same way, because time doesn't do anything to us, but we still, we don't have time, we don't have endless life. So we're suddenly bounded by the capacity of our relationship in this time frame that we have. And garden, I think, especially for me, when I wrote Time and North, one of the poems is garden. I do believe that garden gives us that cycle of life and death in an instant,
Mm.
and say, hey, don't worry about that, you're going to live forever. This is garden. I'm blooming today, and the next season I'm dead, but don't worry about it. I've left the space for another plant to come and take that spot. And
Mhm.
same is true with us. We might not think we can be supplanted, but I do believe that that's the cycle is the same for everybody. Is the the circle, the longer the circle, the shorter the circle. uh,
Mm.
uh, but not to be swayed by the that the end is near or the beginning is far. You also have a window from your home to that beautiful night sky, and that gives you the immense escape of the creation, but also provides you into the collisions of the past and the future that we hold, right? And being a imaginative, futuristic, uh, has your outlook towards what you need to write or what you are imagining changed in this night that adorns on your beautiful abode?
Mm. I think you just used the word collapse of time, and I think that that experience has been really visceral in a way of that this collapse of the past, present, and future. And then I think as a futurist, and also at least in the US, there's such a focus on the future, on this maybe completely made up future state that you're always trying to get to. And with that, you lose a lot of focus on the presence and the past. And something that I think has become so much more apparent for me and so much more important is this connection between not just as a strategist and as a futurist, you're often looking at what is the present situation that you're in. Um, and then you're imagining future possibilities. But it's really helped me look at we also need to be incredibly cognizant of history in the past and be weaving that into our knowledge and how we think about what's to come.
Yeah. And I'd go back to the same gardening terminology, and one poem that I wrote is Glow, and I've just pulled up one line from it. I think if you were to think about our future as harvesting, and
Mm.
say future is nothing but harvesting, and harvesting is bliss beyond seasons, because once you have harvested something, it is not impacted by the season, right? And that to me is the future that you hold, right? We are all trying to get to the harvest, and not the dimension of the time that the future is, right? And you know and flower itself is a harvest, or sometimes a leaf is a harvest, right? But in our mind, if fruit is always the harvest, which you alluded to, I want a secure fruit for my future. And that, I think, is a recipe for anxiety. And that's the modern, and that's contrary to the native world, where everything is, I live in the now, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get things done for now, and let the future happen the way it happens, and I'm going to manage my harvest so that I can enjoy my presence and fulfill, right? Because having a fulfilled life is what it takes. And I think Tao's clays preserves that in its past, right? And that's what I like when you, in your opening statement, that's so full of life, right? And coming back to the Taos, I wanted to understand a little bit more about, uh, in your imagination and in your world now, as you've discovered Taos and people around it, uh, is there something that you can share with us as a Taran? This is what I see in Taos that I want each one of us to cultivate and take it back in their own abodes.
Mm. Yeah, I think that an acknowledgement of the history and culture and people who have come before is such an incredible part of Taos, and the opportunity to learn, of to listen and to pay attention. Taos is a very lively, very Western kind of town. There's a central Spanish style plaza in the center where people gather. But it's also, there's a lot of intentional community, but there's also a lot of quiet. Um, a lot of time to come together, but also really spend in the sort of solitude that exists in a rural community. And those pieces of, well, one other thing about this area is if you have a sense of urgency, this is not the place for you to be. If you
Uh,
need convenience and instant gratification, this is not the place for you to be, which
or
people call New Mexico either the land of enchantment or the land of entrapment. And
the land of detoxification, maybe land of detoxification.
yeah,
There is, yeah.
so
I'm
there's
glad.
this
Yeah.
aspect of letting go of the things that seem to be this false sense of urgency and this false sense of need. It's really freeing in a way, unless you hate it and it becomes entrapment. But it's freeing in a way to support letting go of things, of, you know what, that's not quite as important as I thought. I don't really need to get that done today. I can, plan things differently. I can reset my expectations.
That grace of time is so essential for our growth, right? It is that you can have a deeper conversation with yourself, with others, and focus on the subtleness of the life that is around you, and not worry about the gratification that is so abundant, right? It is not just that in the world we live, the gratification is abundant and it's also instant. So both of it makes it a toxic proportion, in my opinion, right? You can continue. It's like an endless feed.
Mhm.
In terms, my last question before we wrap this conversations, and you have traveled the world, and you've come back to Taos and experienced a lot of things in the early young years of your life as in this journey. Are there any experiences or books that you would recommend young people to at least give it a shot as they build their as they harvest their lives, that I better try this, that has helped you see the world in a different ways than you would have imagined when you were young or teen?
Mhm. So many. I am an avid reader. But one of the books that really helped me shift my trajectory and think differently about my life and completely kind of shifted the direction of my career was a book called The Future You by Brian David Johnson. And he's a futurist who has worked with everything from Fortune 100 companies to military to government to nonprofits to help them envision the future. And this particular book takes all of that knowledge and all of that approach and translates it to how you might be able to use that in your personal life in a simple framework of really that emphasizes storytelling. Changing the story can change your future. And that particular book, because my brain works in a way that I love a framework, but a flexible framework, not that's A, B, C, D, E, a
Yeah.
process, the framework that you can kind of flex and create within. So that's a book that I highly recommend. I purchased it for a number of people um, in order to hopefully help them kind of think about what they want to do in on their journey.
Yeah. No, I'm going to put that in the notes too. But is there a story that you would like to share with us in conclusion, where that you say, hey, after reading this book, this was how I framed a story? It could be anywhere, right? It could be work, it could be whatever comes to your mind,
Mhm.
that you would like to close us with a story.
Sure. So, one of the things that I have been pursuing more for myself recently is creating, art making. And one of the ways in which I'm doing that is I use collage. And I've used this framework as combined with some other elements. There's the heroine's journey, which is a particular way that a story works, and kind of using this to map this self-portrait that I'm creating through collage. So that sounds very maybe overly complicated, but really what it was doing is helping me frame a picture of my life and becoming the narrator of my story. So using this concept of changing the story to change the future, I've really been looking at my story. What are these internal narratives that I have that maybe don't fit the character or the journey that I want to be on? And using my hands and materials to actually turn those fragments of thoughts or those stories into something that's tangible that for me kind of helps me rewrite my own journey in a way that suits where I want to go, not in the way of leaving out bad things but if there's shame in an experience or how can I um,
Or letting go of what you need to let go through putting it
yeah,
on some physical entity.
exactly.
And no, that's such a interesting way, right? Because a lot of time it's not the distance, it's the guilt that
Mm,
keeps the inertia, right? And human beings, we keep guilt to heart, and I use garden to bury my guilt. Sometimes I'll just dig a hole and do nothing with that hole and say, okay, this is it,
very
buddy.
difficult.
This is it. It's coming in and out, right? But in our next collision, we will talk about that, and I would love to see how that painting shows up, and and I'm going to imagine it for now, but I'm glad you're doing this and giving yourself the privilege and using all the subtle colors of Taos to give your journey these colors, and sharing that with us. What a beautiful gift. And again, thank you for giving us the time, and I hope you're going to enjoy your farmer market. A lot of stuff is in season, so have a great
That's a
time,
very
and
exciting time for the market.
yeah, enjoy. Have a good one. Thank you for joining, Kim.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Conversation Trails of the Mountain in Us podcast. Each episode here is crafted with love, adventure, and reflection. We hope you have enjoyed this one, and we welcome your thoughts on it. And if you want to be on the show, feel free to reach out.